What is up, you guys? This is All Day One on the PS4, and I'm going to be giving you a video on what stats to go for on your gear. So it really all depends on the class you're going to be maining and what class you're playing as, what class you're going to focus on, whatever. So it mainly depends on your classes. So if you're playing a DPS class, the stats you're going to want to optimize into looking into would be your here, let me move over. So you would want to go for crit chance. Most definitely is crit chance is a very important one. Armor fracture, main damage, crit damage, and damage to elites. Those are going to be the ones you're going to want to focus on. Now, the ones that I go for crit chance, main damage, crit damage, and damage to elites. So the way I have my gear set up as is I have my ring and my bracelet. They have crit chance, crit damage, and main damage on them, and then I try to get them maxed out as well. And then my brooch and bracelet, I try to get main damage, crit damage, and damage to elites. So that way you can still have high crit damage and main damage, but you can also have up to 12% damage to elites. And then on all four of my gems, I try to go for crit chance, crit damage, and main damage. So I'm still trying to reroll my general defense with crit chance. So now the reason why I'm saying crit chance, crit damage, main damage, and damage to elites is because the damage to elites is mainly for the boss. You don't necessarily have to go for damage to elites though. You can either switch the damage to elites with armor fracture if you're playing a berserker, but regardless, damage to elites is going to do more damage to elite enemies and bosses. Armor fracture just does more damage to enemies that have, somewhat of a high type of armor. But anyways, so with the crit chance, if you're playing a DPS class, I would suggest trying to get to about 30%, at the very least 30% crit chance. So that way, you have a higher chance of hitting crits and whatnot, because the more crits you can hit, the more DPS you're putting out. And then the main damage, you want to try to get to at least 70% main damage. Crit damage, you want to have at least 70% crit damage as well. And then damage to elites, you want to have at least maybe 10%, but 12% is the max amount you can get. So yeah, that's for the DPS type classes. Now, if you're focusing on being a tank, the stats you're going to want to focus on is going to be barrier, general defense, protection against minions, and protection against elites. You can also try to go for crit chance as well. You don't necessarily have to. If you're playing a tank, you really don't have to focus on putting out damage other than keeping aggro and whatnot. But, with Skyforge, it really doesn't matter too much, unfortunately, with tanking on here. Like I said, it really doesn't matter too much. It's mainly about putting out the most damage and whatnot, but there will be times where having a tank is going to be super useful. So having these specific stats is going to help. So if you were tanking, you want to definitely have barrier and general defense and protection against elites as your stats. Now, when you what I would suggest is you want to get general defense on all of your gear, and then you want to get barrier on all of your gear as well. And then you can mix it up with crit chance and protection of elites or from elites. So you can get like these four with crit chance, and then these four down here with protection against elites. So right there is just the tanking and the DPS class stats. For support, you don't necessarily need to worry about what you have and what you don't have, because unfortunately there isn't a support tree. You could go with divine weapon cooldown, because the divine weapon is going to help your symbol, which is going to be the Matarchis staff, I believe. Yeah, the Matarchis staff, and that'll be for the last barrier. That's going to help you as a support class drop it down that the last barrier, but it's only a 40-second cooldown, so it wouldn't really matter too much. So if you're focused on being a support class, you can have the same stats. I would highly recommend just having the same stats as a DPS class, but also maybe try to get like barrier and general defense. So if you can, probably go for crit chance, barrier, and general defense is what what I would suggest going with as support, a support focused character or class. Um, for the secondary stats though, so it says you have key stats and secondary stats. For the DPS classes, chain killing and ritual killing, I believe, are the two you want to go for. So let me go ahead and check that out again. So chain killing and yeah, so ritual killing and chain killing are the two you're going to want to go for. Or you can go with chain killing and anything that really increases your damage. So damage to stunned enemies or damage to slow targets. You can get really. You can also go with melee defense or range defense for extra defense. And then I believe there is damage when combat. Yeah, so damage when combat starts also will help you out a lot as a DPS class. So you can either go with damage when combat starts, chain killing, ritual killing, crippling attack, which will slow down the enemies. You can also go with damage to stun targets or damage to slowed end targets. So that would be for the DPS classes if you're focused on your secondary stats as well. So your main focus is your key stats, and then secondary stats will come after, and that's if you have all the credits. Now, if you're playing a tank class, the stats you're going to want to obviously get would be damage, melee defense, and range defense, because your main focus as a tank is to have as much defensive perks as possible, defensive stats as possible, because your main thing is to try to keep aggro and not get killed. And I'm pretty sure this will work perfect in PvP as well. You probably won't take as much damage. So, but yeah, those would be the two that I would definitely go for. You can also maybe go for defense after healing or mobility after healing, or group healing. But those two, the melee defense and range defense, are the two that I would highly recommend going for. And then if you're playing a support class, then the what is it called? The group healing is definitely going to help out a lot. Because healing orbs restore 6% of health to nearby allies, so that right there is going to help you out a lot as a support class. You can also go with crippling attack because your attacks can also slow down enemies. So those two would be the ones I would go for as a support class: crippling attack and group healing. So that's for support. For the DPSs, you have damage when combat starts, chain killing or ritual killing, and then you also have damage to stun targets or damage to slowed enemies or slow targets. And then you have for the tank classes, you have melee defense, defense when wounded, protection against control, and range defense. So defense when wounded is pretty good. You get an increase in defense, but for a certain amount of seconds. But honestly, I would just rather have the melee and range defense, like I said, because that's just a consistent passive. It's a constant passive. It doesn't have a specific timer or anything. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it with the with the I guess stat setup that you would want to prioritize into depending on your classes. So I'm just gonna go over it all again real quick. So just a recap. So if you're playing a DPS class, your main focus would be crit chance, crit damage, main damage, and damage to elites or armor fracture. If you're playing a support class, your main focus would be crit chance, and then barrier, and probably maybe general defense. You don't necessarily have to go with general defense, but definitely crit chance and barrier are the two that you're going to want to go with. The third one, you can choose main damage, crit damage, or anything else. And then as a tank, you're going to want barrier, general defense, protection against elites, and then mix that also with crit chance if you want crit chance as well. And then for the secondary stats, you're going to want to have for the DPS classes, you're going to want to have damage when combat starts, chain killing, ritual killing, completely forgot the other one, damage to stunned, and damage to slowed targets. So any of those five. Definitely try to keep your mind open for damage when combat starts and chain killing. And then for the tank classes, you want to have the protection or melee defense, range defense, or protection against control, or defense when wounded. But for me, it would be melee defense and range defense. And then for the support classes, pretty much anything works. But like I said, crippling attack would work, and the healing, the group healing. So those two are the ones I would go for as a support. So that's pretty much it though. If this video helped you at all, go leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know down in the comment section. If you have any stat suggestions that you would normally go for your classes or anything, then let me know down in the comment section. And yes, every class can make use of the DPS perks. Every class can make use of, or the DPS stats. Every class can make use of the tank stats and the support stats that I'm giving you guys. All the stats work for everyone. Also, before we end this, I'd like to keep in mind that any stat that has a star is the recommended stats. That's what those mean. It means it's recommended for your class. It doesn't mean you get extra bonuses. It doesn't mean anything like that. It's just those are the stats that are recommended for your class. You do not have to follow those stars though. You don't have to always follow the stars. It's just the stars is kind of like giving you a guideline of what stats to look for. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, if you have any questions or anything, let me know down in the comment section. If you have any other suggestions, let me know as well. I know I've been getting requests for a monk rotation guide and some other classes, and trust me, I'm working on them. I'm trying to get 100% more used to them. I don't want to just give you guys like some random guide or anything. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. This is all day to day one on the PS4. Have a good day, good night, and peace.